Yeah. We are going to discuss the 5 domains. We are going to cover the 5 domains and the important part, important and relevant, and I mean the core information which is important in terms of understanding, also in terms of exam purview. So, as part of first, so these are the 5 domains: information system auditing process, governance and management of IT, information systems acquisition, development and implementation, information systems operations and business resilience, protection of information assets. So, domain 1. So, when we talk about information systems auditing process, it can be divided into 2 different parts. Entire first domain. First could be the planning phase, where we'll be discussing about the information security audit standards, guidelines, code of ethics, and then business processes, type of
Sorry,
controls.
excuse me. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to cut you short. Do I get this document?
I just have prepared myself.
Huh. I mean, how do I go back to this?
Well, Sami, is it fine like if I can share whatever that I cover this particular day? I'll be sharing that with Rita after the class. Would that be okay? Hello? Hello?
Hey, are you still here, Samir?
Okay. No problem. Rita, whatever I'm going to discuss or I'm going to talk, I'll just summarize that discussion and send you, like, I'll share that with you. I'll
Okay,
check
thank
with
you.
what works best. I'll just do that. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm not writing. I'm not gonna write everything. It would take us back. We will not be able to achieve much today. We have just 1 hour. So that's why I thought maybe it's wiser if I get some kind of recording or document to, listen over and over and better understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. I think that can be done. I'll check with Samir anyways and confirm. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and also, just to be clear, I won't be reading whatever is there on the PPT. I'll try to more focus on explaining it. So, hope that approach is fine with you. All right.
Sure. Sure.
So, so it will be in 2 phases: planning and execution. So, this is the overview of that particular, like, and in this very first domain, it talks about how we make use of basic standards, principles, methods, guidelines, whatever, uh, which, which contributes to perform, to execute a better information system audits. Okay, and this mainly focus on what auditors should be doing to execute any plans. So the outcome of this would be how an auditor should be and what kind of parameters he built, or basis what parameters he'll be developing the audit plan, how he'll be developing the audit charter, how we land upon performing the audits. So that is the key takeaway from this first domain. So when I keep saying information systems, information technology, so can you help me understand, like, can you give a thought what is information system? When I consistently talking about information system, what according to you is an information system?
Okay. So, information system could be anything that is able to house information, right? Be it and has some kind of access control to it. So if we are talking about information system, is about mainly computers, um, networking. Um, it's just the whole information technology.
Yes. So any medium, be it a physical, electronic, anything which consists a piece of information, that we call that as an information, and protecting that information is the whole concept of this. So as part of this, especially with CISA, we focus on protecting the information system of the information assets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we land up on information security. When we say information security, the term itself says what exactly to be determined, like what information needs to be protected, the reason why it should be protected, how to protect it, and how to protect it from. So whenever we say protecting an information, we should focus on, just questioning ourselves on this, because basically, the basic fundamental rule, an auditor should have a basic knowledge of on everything. He need not to be a technical person, because he is always accompanied with a technical person, but he need to have a basic understanding of everything. He always need to think. To be a better auditor, we always need to think in a risk based approach. So when we start thinking in that way, we always end up in a good security posture, which in turn contributes a good compliance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Effective information security reduces any sort of information risk by protecting the organization against any threats, vulnerabilities. That's how it contributes to reduce the impact to the assets. So now when I say threat and vulnerability, so could you please differentiate? Because most of the questions, when we are appearing for example, most of the questions are, people fail to understand the basic difference between a threat and vulnerability. So if we have a clear understanding with it, then we can easily understand the question where it is coming from. So can you try, like, what
Yes.
according to you? Yeah.
So a threat is anything that is encroaching, right? Anything that is affecting the integrity of a system. That is a threat. Then the vulnerability is vulnerability is already there. How do I say it? The system is already exposed to that threat. So it is now vulnerable. But a threat is, I don't know if I should say oncoming, while vulnerability is already there.
Oh, yes. Like, in one way, yes. Your whatever you said or whatever you're thinking, you're in right way. But vulnerability is some gap in the system. Like, if a system is designed to, for example, if a system is let's take a very normal example. So just let me know if you're comfortable with examples, or if I take a better one, just to develop the understanding I'm using it, but you can always stop me. Okay.
Okay,
So,
let me tell you what I know.
Yeah.
I know we have what they call vulnerability scans, right? Where we scan the system for vulnerabilities, right? And we also know what we have. I know what is called gap analysis, where you try to find out what the difference is from what is required and what we have, right? And then you try to cover up the gap. Now, for vulnerability scans, we're scanning the system just like running a patch. You're scanning the system for making sure that the integrity for the specific level of that system is there, be it medium, high, or low, right? So you make sure that you have all your controls in place so that if an auditor and assessor should come in, the risk or whatever thing they find will not be what you cannot mitigate. You either absorb, you either own a risk, or you cut it, you let it go. Those are the things. Okay, go on.
No problem, no problem. Yeah. So, as you rightly said, threat is always which has some potential to to lead to some unwanted incident.
Yes.
Agree?
Yes.
So that would result a system or even sometimes an organization. So every threat has a potential to harm asset. Asset could be anything. It could be people, technology, process. It could be anything which adds some value to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So something which has threat to potentially to harm that asset, that is and something which has capacity to exploit that is called vulnerability. Like as
Yes.
you said, patching. If we take example of patching itself, whatever whatever it is simple, whatever to be there and whatever that is not there, we do gap analysis out of that, and something which is not there is the weakness, and that weakness is the vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And the vulnerability is always caused because of a threat. Okay, and the combination of this two could contribute to a risk. That's how the whole concept of risk-based approach arrives. So we should all, given any situation, we should be easily able to identify what are the contributing factors for threat, what are the contributing factors for vulnerability, and how it can impact, and then we end up having a risk value. And once we have once we know what is the risk in that situation, we always need to think in a way that what as an auditor, what as an implementer, our approach should be to treat that. So we in compliance with the available market standards. So in CISA doesn't mandate that you just need to follow only this standard. There were many number of information security standards available. So basis your requirement, you need to make sure whatever you are implementing basis some standard or a framework, you need to make sure you are in compliant with that. In compliant is nothing but meeting all the requirements, particularly meeting all the agreed requirements. Clear?
Mm-hmm.
And some types of common threats, when we say, it could be if we consider some natural events, it could be some floods, volcanic phenomena and all, technical failures, equipment failures, software malfunction, unauthorized actions. All this could contribute, all this could be a threat statements, different types of threats that we see across. And information security is always about protecting information to make sure the CIA triangle is met, which is nothing but the confidentiality, availability, and integrity.
And integrity, yeah.
Yeah. So when I say confidentiality, what according to you is confidentiality?
Confidentiality could be the level of who can access it and who cannot.
Yes, like any information which is made available, whether unauthorized individuals could access it, not whether they could authorize that information or not. Availability is what is availability?
Is it readily available to be used?
Yes, usable on demand by an authorized person or an entity or a group. That's it. Integrity is always, again I want to hear from you.
Okay, so integrity, my own is it efficient and reliable?
Integrity is something where the information cannot be manipulated.
Yes, reliability.
Yes. Accuracy and completeness of information is always being protected. So if we are able to make sure information system is protected on these three elements, then we can always say that it's in a good shape.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yes, when I say risk-based approach, what according to you a risk-based approach, and what could be the major difference between the risk management and the risk assessment?
Sorry, did you say risk management and risk assessment?
Yes.
You are assessing the risk to know if it's something you can manage, or isn't that risk assessment? Like, okay, so if a system has, if an assessor comes to an organization and is assessing a particular system, right? And that system has some risk, of course they will always find some controls that is not in compliance, or up to the level that they want it to be. And then they flag those systems, and then the ASOR or the team is requested to do some kind of plan of action and milestone to kind, I don't know how to explain it, but I know what I'm saying. I just don't know how to put it together. I know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
To be like, if we are asked to differentiate, whatever you said, I totally agree. That is correct. But if somebody wants us to differentiate what you do as part of assessment and what do you mean by managing a risk, because when we are appearing for managerial roles, it's always important, especially for the compliance role. We need to make sure we have a clear understanding between these two. Risk assessment is always ends at the moment when we determine the risk value. What is the risk? Okay. Risk management is an end-to-end activity. It has entire process: identifying the risk, evaluating, analyzing, proposing some recommendations, mitigating the risk, and then revisiting the risk, whether the actual risk has come down, documenting the residual risk, and then continuously monitoring. So all these entire cycle, it's risk management. If we end up till the moment we analyze it, then it's a risk assessment. That's a very thin line between these two terminology.
Can you say what risk assessment is again?
Risk assessment, it just identifies, evaluates, analyzes, and we end up having a risk value, or we end up deriving the risk statement. So up to the proper identification, we call it as a risk assessment, and then the next step is risk treatment. In that, as part of that, we propose some mitigation activity. We make sure we take the logs of current controls. We map it whether the existing controls are enough, whether the existing controls to what level the existing controls will be able to help us to reduce the risk, and we propose or we recommend what level of controls to be implemented to bring down the assessed risk. For example, if it's a quantitative risk, if we say the initial identification of risk is high, there ends our assessment, and as a next step, wherein we put some effort mitigation controls to bring down the risk, and we land up at the residual risk. So the entire life cycle of risk is risk management, where it includes risk assessment of identification, evaluation, analyzing, mitigation, communication, reporting, monitoring. Entire life cycle is risk management. Only till the time we have we assess the risk, like we land up on the risk value. That is assessment in general, like basic understanding.
Okay. You know, I will need this video, this recording, right? Because what you're saying is not written here.
Okay, okay. Okay, I'm just going a bit detailed. I can just parallelly check with Samir, and as I said, whatever we discuss, I can just put that.
He said you will get. He responded.
Okay, perfect, perfect then, no issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first and foremost, as part of domain 1, the task statements. So I divided the task statements and the knowledge statements, because these could be the possible tasks that we are, as an auditor, or we are expected to perform. So the list of tasks that I'm presenting here. So, and these are the knowledge statements, like how what helps us to perform this task. So that's how we can differentiate. So the whole idea of discussing the information security risk and all, because the entire course is built on, if we have proper understanding with this terminology, so that the entire course can be run smoothly. Okay, and whenever we say plan, we see, as I said, it is divided into two parts: planning and execution.
Mm-hmm.
In the planning phase, information even before we start that, what according to you is an audit? We keep saying audit. What according to you an audit? How it is relevant in this context, and what kind of audits we are mainly focused in compliance? What could be different audits that you can just a thought?
Like, I really don't know how to explain. Like, audit in general is just making sure that an organization is keeping to the standard of what is required for whatever kind of information that goes through their system. So an auditor is supposed to come in and verify if those standards are in place and what those information is used for. Yeah.
Yes. Auditing is nothing but a formal examination that we generally do for information systems to determine whether those information systems are complying with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, service agreements, industry guidelines, whatever the organization claims that they are doing that. So we perform a formal examination against that, making sure whatever they claim, whether they are in line with the requirements, whether they are complying with that requirements or not. In simple, this is the audit. Okay. And it's always important for IS auditors to first understand, we should be in a position to evaluate the business processes of the organization which we are going to audit. This includes both the test and evaluation of the control. So when I say business processes, who can be the business process owner?
The organization, isn't it?
See, well, in organization, see, there is one single person cannot handle the entire functionalities or across the organization. So each process has a defined business owner, which we call that person as a business process owner, and his core responsibility is to identify the process requirements, approving the process design, managing the process performance, committing, to let resources to process specific risk management activities. So he is a person who will be able to manage all these functions. His core responsibilities is to make sure these 4 activities are done. So he is responsible for identifying, he is responsible for approving the process design, he is responsible to make sure whether what was agreed is everything is managed properly, and also he need to make sure a proper risk management approach is also being considered for that process. So a business process owner is a person who is responsible for managing that particular process end to end. Okay, clear?
Yes.
Yeah. And as I said, audit chatter, what, like, any guess on the audit chatter, like what information does an audit chatter might have?
An audit what? Sorry.
Chatter, CHARTER.
Oh, I don't know what an audit chapter.
Okay. So audit, yeah, that is one. See, it's a document wherein the responsibility, the authority, and the accountability of the entire information systems audit function is documented. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and that particular charter is to be approved, is required to be approved by the relevant audit committee. Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of a, so if we talk in a layman language, it's a kind of a RACI, we can say, but technically not correct, but for our understanding we can just correlate that with that.
Like a RACI chart.
Yes, because it has all the information, the responsibility,
all the stakeholders and all that.
Yes, appropriately documented within it, and it should be it should be definitely to be approved by the auditing committee. Okay. Yeah. And when I say auditor, he should have some set of skills. So he should be technically competent. It's not mandate that he should have a complete core technical skills, but he need to have understanding across the industry-wide technology. So when we are going to audit for some process, it's not mandate that we have end-to-end technical knowledge on it, but whatever we are going to audit, we need to have a basic understanding of that, because an auditor can always request for a technical person to accompany him to perform audit, but he should be in a position to identify what could go wrong. So the core competency is the technical understanding, having right skills and knowledge necessary to perform audit for that particular area. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. And audit planning. So whenever we say audit planning, this is a very beginning step that is required before we perform an audit. And what we do as part of this audit planning, so in the beginning of any audit process, we will be establishing the overall audit strategy and detail to the specific procedures.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That particular audit plan should include all the processes that are rated high, because if we are going to audit some financial institution, so the organization, we need to get this kind of information from them which they feel are the critical processes for them. Okay, they need to give a proper rating, so that we'll be focusing more on that area, so which we can ideally could represent that, we can perform audit focusing on that area followed by the rest of the areas. So it is always important to know the high rated processes in any organization that we go. Okay, and also we need to make sure what are the effects of these laws and regulations while we do the audit planning. Okay. And this could affect in two different areas, like what is the impact of the audit and what is the audit scope, what are the legal requirements. For example, if you are going and auditing some what we say, any banking industry, so they have their own regulators, right? Regulatory bodies. So we need to ensure what are the local laws. We need to make sure, we need to have information on what are the local laws, what are the local law requirements, what are the local regulatory requirements, and then we should be equipped with that information. While planning of audit, we need to make sure we have all the information, because that's where most of the times generally people fail. That's where the compliance fail most of the times. All the processes and everything, everybody have an idea, but whether they are in line with the requirements that are expected by the local relevant regulatory bodies or any authority authorized organizations that they are tied up. So we need to make sure we have that information. That should be the key part while planning an audit. Okay. And to effectively audit any business applications, and as an auditor we must obtain the clear understanding of that process which we are going to review. For example, if we are going to review some patching process, for example, patching is the process that as an auditor we are going to review. We need to make sure whether there is a process in place, whether there is a proper policy defined, what is their frequency, whether they have defined the frequency of patching cycle, whether they are performing it or they are outsourcing to some other third party to perform that activity, and whether they are going all the change management procedures before going for patching, before taking the downtime from the client, whether they have all the sign off approvals. We just need to understand what is the process flow, because it differs from organization to organization. So before we going to audit anything, we need to make clear understanding of that process, and we can always get that information by buddying up with the technical owners, I mean the person who is owning that process. Okay. And then next, controls. So we need to make sure what are the current controls in place. So that helps to analyze us the current situation of that, and whether that current controls will be able to help us whenever we land up on some risk. Whenever a risk arises, whether the controls are good enough to protect us that from risk or not. So it's always important to understand the effectiveness of controls, because some people, they say, for example, physical security, if we take, generally people claim, if we go for audit, generally people claim that we are having this ISO 27001 certified, so we are good implementing all that. But on real time, if we go on audit, they won't be following any of the requirements. They have the certification, but on real time the controls are not effective. They have controls in place, they have determined that control. For example, surveillance, there is a surveillance system in place, but what if a proper backup is not taken? So when I go for an audit and when we ask, give me the data of last 15 days, because that is where some incident might have occurred as per the register, if they fail to provide that data, so does that mean they are meeting that control? Although they have the requirement in place, the control is not effective, right? It is not properly defined. What is a backup, how many what is the period that we need to retain that information? So all this information is required, and how we get to know? Only by the control owners of that particular process, they should be telling the effectiveness of the control, whether the control is effective or ineffective. Okay, we need to make sure we have that information just to understand whether to what level they can reduce the risk to the organization. Okay, and then we just need to understand what is there any whatever the process that we are going to audit, whether it has some objectives to build on, because that is how we can assess the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Okay, and the next important thing is, as an information systems auditor, we always need to see, generally people say yes, we have this in place. It's not just that word is not just enough for us as an auditor. We always need to fact check that. We always need to analyze the evidence that was gathered throughout the audit to determine if the operations are analyzed properly, well controlled and effective. So always an evidence needs to be analyzed. Okay. Control matrix then comes, usually generally there's a document called control matrix, where that particular document is helpful for assessing what controls are in place, what controls are ineffective. We can also expect that we can also gather that information before we audit a system. Okay, and as I mentioned, the very first thing, always an approach should be a risk-based audit planning. So risk-based auditing always uses risk assessment to make the audit plan in order to minimize the audit risk during the execution of an audit. So as you said, whenever we go for an audit, we just try to gather information. Were there any risk assessments being performed? Were there any gap analysis that were performed? So we can always go check, have those reports from the internal teams, and basis that we can plan our strategy. We'll get a fair idea, like where is the gap, what are the risk areas from that. So if we plan on that, so audit is not, as we already discussed, it is just to check whether we are complying with the requirements or not. How we get to know? If we know the risk, then we can identify easily what is the risk of not being compliant with the agreed requirement. So if we try to figure out that, then we are all good. So that is why a risk-based approach is most important. Okay, and so far so good.
Yes.
Yeah. And please don't worry, whatever I talk all through the session, I'll give you notes on it. Okay, you can always refer and we can discuss any queries. Okay, now what could be the types of audits? Okay, there are different types of audits that we perform. The first and foremost is information system audit, which is nothing but evaluating the evaluation of information systems. Information systems are nothing but which holds the information. It could be anything, people, process, technology. It could be from anything which has some information which is important, which is adding some value to that organization, and that need to be protected based on the CIA triangle. And then next comes the compliance audit. Compliance audits are, any guess, like by the term compliance? So just before this session, like we were discussing, like how come you know the compliance posture when you are not working here? That was your question, right? So if we are good at understanding the requirements of a compliance audit, that can be done sitting at anywhere. Because, for example, so if we are working for, there is a CCPA Act, especially for the residents of California, people whomsoever residing there. So if we are working with, if we are working with the data or the information of that particular residence, if we are processing that information, using that information of that particular agent, so we have a requirement to make sure that we comply with that regulatory requirement of that particular CCPA Act. Okay?
Yeah, just like FedRAMP, TexRAMP for Texas.
Yes,
And,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And most widely heard GDPR, General Data Protection Act.
Yep.
Yeah. So whatever the so even although we are here, if we are processing using any information of the European people, so we need to make sure we are in compliance with that law. Similarly, now these days, because of this wide exposure of cyber attacks and the changing scenarios of the technology, the importance of data is becoming high, and that's where every country, every state is coming up with every province is coming up with their own data protection thing. So if you're good at understanding the requirement of that particular law, because that cannot be altered, so it's publicly available. So if we make sure that we know the requirements of that particular regulatory body, we can audit accordingly. So that how we come to know, it's always basis on the client, it's always basis on the organization, basis on the contract that we are going to sign in. So during the very initial phase itself, we can identify like what would be the contractual requirements and what would be the legal obligations that we are bound to that particular process. So that's where the compliance requirement comes in. And compliance requirements, any regulatory body only says this should be done, this should be in place. How you do, what controls you implement, what best practices you follow, they actually don't focus on that. They focus only whether the requirement is met or not. That's it. For example, GDPR says the data should be protected. How we protect and all, it's up to the organization implementing the relevant controls. It could be ISO controls, it could be COVID controls, it could be ITGC controls, it could be any control, but the end idea is to make sure the information is protected. Okay, that's how like these days the demand for compliance audit are also growing, because if any failure, major or minor, any failure in the financial or in the compliance audits will end up with the legal penalties, right? Other audits, we can take that leverage and just work on it, but when we are facing some government bodies or some authorities, regulatory bodies, it's always tough. And then next come financial audit. It's just that accuracy of the financial reporting in that organization. It is more focused on the financial aspects. Compliance audits more focus on the regulatory aspects. Information system audits more focuses on the information system. Operational audits, which focuses on the internal processes, internal control on each process. In organization, there could be different processes. There could be networking team, there could be programmers, SGLC team, there could be physical security, human resource team, whatever. Different processes have their own operational requirements built on the internal controls that they are following. So whenever we are performing that audit, we call that as an operational audit. Mostly these are in-house audits performed by the internal teams itself, just before facing the external. Generally, I'm just generalizing this, it's not always that, but generally. Okay. And then comes specialized audit, because this comes only these are the specific audits which are focuses whenever a fraud or whenever some fraud occurs or some incident occurs, something is filed, then we perform the forensic audits, right, to dig in what happened. So these are the specialized audits. Functional audits, another type of audit is a functional audit, wherein we will be verifying the configuration items, and that configuration items could be anything. the list of whole inventory. Within that could be so far any questions, like
No,
anything you want to
no, I understand.
okay. Mm, so yeah, this the planning covers most of it. Like we need to make sure we execute a proper risk-based audit strategy. How we develop that strategy is always having a proper audit charter, always having a proper audit planning. How we plan and all we have already discussed. I'll be giving you notes on that. And whether whatever been information that is provided, we always need to fact check mapping with the relevant evidences, and we need to make sure we conduct audits in accordance to the relevant IS audit standards. That always comes from the requirement of the organization, and we need to make sure these audit results are properly documented and communicated to the relevant stakeholders. It could be through conducting management meetings, steering committee meetings, or presenting in their forums, or through audit reports. Whatever the way they prefer, we always need to make sure all the key stakeholders, generally the key stakeholders would be the process owners, the approving the persons who approve the process, the persons who is overall accountable for that process, and the person who is overseeing and managing from the management team. So these are the key and the dependent third parties and relevant information owners. So these generally these are the key stakeholders that we hear across. And audit not just end declaring the audit results, we always need to make sure we do a proper follow-up, because after an audit we issue some report, right?
Mm-hmm.
So have you come across hearing the non-conformity report, or have you like seen any audit reports so far? Like,
No, I have not.
yeah, generally after performing the audit, while having they'll be having a discussion with the management people. Most of the time it will be the representative of that organization, CISO, Chief Information Technology of Information Security Officer. So no auditor will directly publish his results. He'll be telling all his findings in detail, explaining that. He'll give time to that people to come back and show any additional evidences, because it's not every time we get the information at one go. So we'll give that leverage to them. After that, upon taking their concurrence, we will file that non-conformity. Non-conformity is nothing but not meeting the requirement. For example, if we take GDPR, it says any incident, if it occurs, any incident, the relevant person or the relevant body, the relevant owners should be informed within 72 hours. That is a requirement of that regulatory of that GDPR. Okay, if organization fails to do that, if auditor finds out that is not met, then he'll be documenting that as a non-conformity, which is not in line with the requirement of what was agreed. So he'll be giving that. He'll be checking that. He'll be giving some. If it is a major non-conformity, it should be rectified in 1 month of time. For example, it always again depends on the organization and their process and all. So generally they'll be giving 1 month of time. So in 1 month of time they'll be again checking, so whether corrective actions are taken, whether the preventive actions are determined, everything. So that's where audit follow-ups is always important, because audits are not only internal, or sometimes they get certified against some through some certification bodies. So that's how the audit follow-up is important, because whatever been identified, that needs to be actioned, and the risk has to be come down. Okay, that is the main motive. So that is the reason they just do the proper follow-up. After communication, follow-up is also very important, whether proper just to determine relevant actions are being taken by management in a timely manner or not. Okay, and yeah, I think um, we can't cover the other topic if we move ahead. We have just 5 minutes left, so I'll be open for any questions or take some feedback. Are you comfortable with the pace and with the flow? Or I just want to take feedback and maybe I can help.
Yeah,